Well, if it's Sunday, it's Wrestling Night in America here on pwtorchdailycast.com and the PWTorch YouTube page. That is youtube.com/pwtorch. I am Pro Wrestling Torch columnist Greg Parks, and it is Sunday, August 11th, 2024. And we are sort of in the calm before the storm. We are in the eye of the pro wrestling hurricane, as it were, with SummerSlam in the rear view mirror. But in 2 short weeks, we've got All In and then Bash in Berlin to close out the month. So even though it seems like there might not be a lot to talk about, we've got quite a bit to talk about. So if you want to join in on the chat, you're listening live. You can send your comments in the chat box on YouTube. We will highlight some of the pertinent ones and talk about them. And of course, you can email us anytime, WNIAlivecast@gmail.com. And if you want to be a member of PW Torch, we would sure appreciate it. It's pwtorch.com/govip. So let me put the email up there so you can see it if you're watching us live or even on delay. It's at WNIAlivecast@gmail.com. I wish I had done all this while I was talking about it, but it doesn't hurt to go back, be part of the show, type your questions in the chat, and we will discuss them live. And always be sure to comment below, subscribe, like our channel. We really appreciate that. Getting this YouTube channel off the ground for PW Torch has been a lot of fun. Had a lot of opportunities to be on the 12-minute hot takes that are part of the YouTube page with Wade Keller and everything that goes into that. Of course, all the Wrestling Night in America's live Sunday night at our usual time of 8 p.m. Eastern, but also after the major pay-per-views and PLEs for WWE and AEW. My co-host tonight is making his PW Torch YouTube channel debut, but he's certainly not making his Wrestling Night in America debut. He is someone who is a frequent collaborator of mine going back years and years. It is pwtorch.com contributor John Mezzera. John, welcome to the show tonight.
Thank you for having me, Greg, and I'm excited to be making my video debut on PW Torch YouTube. It's more or less the same, but it's a little different.
The excitement is palpable, isn't it, John? I mean, you can just cut it with a knife.
I know. Well, and we do these when I've guest starred on Then and Now with Frank Pettiani, including a couple months ago for the King of the Ring '94 look back that we just did. We do that through Zoom, so I'm like on the video with Frank, but we don't actually post the video for anyone to see. So this is similar but different.
Yes, for sure, and it is always an adventure when we're doing this, and it's a great plug for Frank's show Then and Now. I was just on this past week talking about SummerSlam 1994, Undertaker versus Undertaker, Bret Hart versus Owen Hart in a steel cage. That is a VIP only show, so that is another incentive for you to go VIP if you want to hear Frank's Then and Now, where he sits down with a member of the Torch family and they review a historical pay-per-view, sometimes for the wrong reasons, but they are historical nonetheless. Go VIP at
Definitely.
PW Torch. So, John, the theme of tonight's show, as I've talked about, is looking back at SummerSlam, also looking ahead at All In. I got to get this question in there first, John, for you, though. John, do you believe in Joe Hendry? That is a question from the chat. So we got to have your thoughts on that right away.
Well, I believe that he exists. I'm not a TNA viewer, so when they started this recent collaboration with NXT, it was kind of all new for me, except for, some of the acts, like, that have been around for a long time, like Alex Shelley or whoever, or some of the former WWE acts who've made their way over to TNA. So Joe Hendry was not someone I was familiar with until he was on for a Battle Royal. And the reaction he got made me think, this guy's a big deal. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know his story, the music, etc. But then he got eliminated right away, which I found very confusing, especially the way they've used him since then. So I'm not sure what they were doing with that first appearance, but I get the catchiness of the tune and everything and the charisma. I haven't seen enough to really judge him as a potential, star act at this point. So, for me, it's a little incomplete, early to tell. Not enough exposure since I haven't seen him, in in TNA. But I fear that the hype is more than the worth. But
And Derek in the chat says, I do not get the Joe Hendry hype yet. I do enjoy how excited people are about him. I just do not see it myself. I mean, I get that. I totally understand his brand of humor is not for everybody. There's going to be criticism that he's not a top level worker, which he's not. But he does bring something unique to the table. He is someone that people seem to be rallying around as just a outside the box kind of a different character who comes up with these songs for people that are kind of cheesy. And again, your mileage may vary. They could be cheesy in a way that makes you like him. They could be cheesy in a way that is a turnoff for you. So I get that he is definitely a polarizing figure, I think.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm not going to be too judgy yet. So we'll see. And, there's plenty of acts. LA Knight's not a top in-ring talent, and he's got a huge following. And
that's an interesting comparison. Yeah, I think there's some valid comparisons there. I know Sean can't stay very long, so we want to get his question out there right away. Jarrett Danielson from this past week on AEW, he says he did not need to prove to Jeff he was all in, just weird. That part has gotten crazy. I liked that match. I thought it was kind of a fun old school brawl. So I did enjoy it, but I think the larger point that Sean makes about this whole Jarrett Danielson situation, where Jarrett basically says to Danielson, are you in this to win it? You got to go all in. And then Danielson, unprompted by Swerve, puts his career on the line, which would seem like a real dummy move. But he's listening to Jeff Jarrett. But then after the promo, he goes and gets mad at Jeff Jarrett and challenges him to a fight. So, and then as the announcers brought up, like, Jeff Jarrett wants Bryan Danielson to win, but here he is in this match, hitting him with a steel chair and beating him to the point where he's putting Danielson's very opportunity against Swerve in jeopardy. So a lot of the storyline with Danielson and Jarrett hasn't lined up for me, but I thought the match was really fun, and I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I've been confused, I think is the best way to describe the whole Jarrett Danielson storyline. I haven't understood. And I kept thinking, did I miss an episode? Did I miss something at the beginning when they first started it that would explain why it was happening in the first place? So I've been a little confused with Jarrett's involvement, and yeah, the whole idea of the career being on the line and you've got to go all in, and what does this have to do with Jarrett? And it hasn't worked for me, mostly just not really understanding what they're going for or why Jarrett in particular. He doesn't really have a history that I know of with either wrestler. So it's just been kind of odd. And for that reason, I guess the match itself was fine. I don't have an issue with, the execution of the match, but just the fact that it was happening in the first place was odd to me, and seems to take away a little bit. And then you had, Swerve kind of presents himself in a fairly serious manner, other than his dancing manager. And, Bryan usually is a pretty serious kind of person. So why are we getting off on this tangent? It doesn't seem needed, where you could just build like alpha versus alpha, top star versus top star. I don't know that you really need the career stipulation, because we already know that Daniel Bryan has said he's probably going to be at least semi-retiring this year. I guess this means, well, if he wins, he'll semi-retire and could still wrestle, but if he loses, he'll never wrestle. I don't know. You have Jim Ross saying Daniel Bryan's going to probably retire no matter what. And it's like, well, if that's the case, then what's the stipulation about? The whole thing leaves a lot to be desired for what I'm guessing is in the end going to be a tremendous match.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Jarrett involvement, I think, stems from the Owen Hart Cup, which Bryan Danielson won, and Jarrett being a very close friend, being in the tournament, and being a very close friend of Owen. I think that it kind of sprouted from that. So, that's kind of the thing. But we'll get to more on All In a little later on. I want to get to John's email, and we'll start really with the SummerSlam fallout. John's first topic, he says, can Damien Priest be a super hot babyface without Rhea Ripley? He says, I think it's quite interesting that before the build to this Gunther match began, the crowd wasn't exactly giving Priest thunderous reactions, even though he was already effectively a babyface. But the crowd was super behind him on Raw in his first promo in the ring, and I think he has certainly got momentum, and he's been great for a while now. I really liked the Priest and Rhea embrace on Raw and establishing them being on the same page opposite the updated version of the Judgment Day. However, I do think if you compare Damien's popularity versus Rhea, she is probably on another level, which is nothing to be ashamed about. Damien is very good at what he does, but it wasn't like it was the fans who willed him into becoming a good guy like someone like LA Knight or even Rhea herself. WWE had to tell his story of growing up on the streets and all his struggles and position Gunther as this absolutely disgusting human being who's judging and insulting him to the point that the fans in the arenas really connect with him on a more personal level and give him a strong reaction. I certainly think he can be a super hot babyface independent of Rhea, but I could also see how Rhea's immense popularity and cool factor could mean there's a drop off for Damien if he has to eventually return to doing solo promos again without these other personalities to work off of. Question, can Damien Priest be a super hot babyface without Rhea Ripley? I think it depends on your definition of what a super hot babyface is. I think he does come across as cool. He has that cool factor about him, which is a good start. I think being positioned with Rhea, if that is the direction they go, and I'm not sure that's the direct. I'm not sure how closely Rhea and Damien are going to be tied together going forward. I wrote a Parks' take on pwtorch.com earlier this week, looking at the potential of a Judgment Day War Games match at Survivor Series, in which I would put Damien Priest and Rhea Ripley on one side. So if WWE decides to go that direction, they're going to be tied together for a while. But I do think Damien Priest has the potential to be a really solid babyface without Rhea. Now, super hot, I don't know. Remember, I mean, he's still kind of finding his footing as a babyface. He has been a tweener for a while now. So I think if the intention, John, moving forward is to make him a full-fledged 100% babyface, I think it's going to be a lot easier for him to catch on as super hot without being kind of tied to this heel group that's Judgment Day, because I think that was always kind of getting in the way of Priest exploding as a babyface. He's kind of a babyface doing babyface stuff, but he's still tied to this group, Judgment Day, which is mostly a heel group. Untethered from that, I am interested to see if he can continue to rise as a babyface moving forward, and a lot of it's going to depend on booking. Does WWE continue to see him as a top-level main event wrestler, or does he kind of settle back into the position he was in, a pretty decent upper mid-card position, but not quite main event position before he got the title?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and with I think John's points in the email that he brought up. It's not necessarily a common thing for somebody to lose a world title and feel like they're better off afterwards, but that's how I feel with Priest. He was in that odd between mode, which I commented on multiple times in my hits and misses columns at pwtorch, where it's like you had this weird dynamic with Priest and Ripley as like baby faces and the rest of the group as heels, and now everyone's slated where they should be slated. The newly constituted or reconstituted Judgment Day are clearly heels. Damien Priest, with that really strong showing despite the loss to Gunther, losing the title. But there was definitely some fire that he showed, towards the end of that match and then towards Finn Balor that was missing. And I think that's a good spark for him. As far as the Rhea Ripley connection, I think it just makes sense as they were friends and part of this group. So now they've both broken away. Of course, they're still going to be friends. Doesn't mean they have to be seen every week together. It doesn't mean they have to be doing a lot of, mixed tag matches together. I would assume we'll get some, but they can be their own, group. I don't want to see like a romance or any of that. That would not be needed. But I think it makes sense from both a storyline standpoint and let's continue to get Priest hotter, because as you point out, clearly Rhea is more over than just about everyone on the roster at this point.
Well, that brings us to Priest versus Finn Balor, which is one of the SummerSlam Fallout pieces that I wanted to talk with you about. When do you think WWE does that match? Because I just wrote a column in the upcoming Torch newsletter, also recorded my Greg Parks Out Loud VIP audio show. And, if you're looking at Damien Priest potentially getting a rematch with Gunther down the line, I think he's got an argument given the involvement of Finn Balor. I mean, Finn Balor, if he comes out of this Damien Priest feud on top, maybe he's got a case to face Gunther at some point, heel versus heel. I don't know how you pull that off. But what do you think? What do you see as the first match for Priest Balor? Do they do it at Berlin coming up, or is that too soon of a turnaround? Do you see them holding off until perhaps Bad Blood, the aptly named Bad Blood, for this Priest Balor feud and match?
My gut is telling me they'll stretch it out a little bit more. I think you'll have some of those, heel tactics of Finn can use to evade. How AEW has done multiple times with MJF, where you've got to beat like 17 people to get the shot. I could see them doing something like that, where he's got to beat all the other members of Judgment Day. You also have Finn as the half the tag team champion. So I'm not seeing necessarily a tag team situation where Priest gets a teammate to take them on, but they could use that almost as an excuse. Balor has an excuse. And assuming we go back to the recent non-major PLE trend of about 5 matches, there's probably plenty of other matches to fill out those 5 for the Berlin show without going right away. So Bad Blood might just make more sense.
The second question from John in his email is about the potential return of Charlotte Flair. He asks, if Charlotte returns in a feud with Nia and Tiffany, is this the best use of her? He says, I proposed this several weeks back to Wade on a podcast because it just makes sense that once Charlotte returns, she will at least initially share some screen time with Tiffany Stratton. This is because Tiffany is positioned as a future top star and Charlotte can give her the rub. This may not even end up happening, but with Nia's huge celebration coming up next week and post SummerSlam often having big moments and returns, I could imagine Charlotte maybe returning, and I personally imagine a Charlotte versus Tiffany match at WrestleMania or even earlier if they cannot wait. Some people believe Charlotte returning to feud for the title would be boring and unnecessary, but I am hoping her character and demeanor has been updated and we see a more mature and down-to-earth version of her. If this happens and she's effective in this role, then I would personally be okay with her going for the SmackDown Women's Championship. This is going on a lot of assumptions, however. So the question, if Charlotte returns in a feud with Nia and Tiffany, is this the best use of her? I think that anytime Charlotte Flair is on active duty, she's going to be in the conversation around the women's title on whatever brand she is on. That's just how WWE views her. She's earned that to a degree. So her coming back as a babyface, even though I think most people agree she's better off as a heel, but her coming back as a babyface and challenging Nia Jax for the title makes a lot of sense. you look at Tiffany Stratton, she could come back as a babyface, feud with Tiffany Stratton. I'm kind of getting the sense that they may be thinking of turning Tiffany Stratton babyface already. I mean, given her interaction with Nia, right now she's kind of in a subservient role to Nia Jax as the Money in the Bank briefcase holder. I could see a scenario where she turns babyface by cashing in on Nia and kind of turning on Nia. She's also been interacting backstage with Chelsea Green. I don't see Chelsea turning babyface, so I think that babyface is Tiffany to a lot of people. So you're also talking then about Charlotte coming back as a heel, potentially feuding with Tiffany Stratton down the line. I don't think that's something they do right away, John. I think it's more likely when Charlotte comes back that she's in the title feud with Nia as opposed to Tiffany. I think that's something they may hold off until a little further down the line.
Yeah, and you've got the queen. It's just right there. You've got, the queen of the ring versus, Charlotte and her kind of queenly persona. So it just seems like, and I agree 100%, Charlotte's better off as a heel, but she's going to get a babyface reaction when she returns. So you can have her as a babyface for a while before the inevitable heel turn. And I am also thought they seem to be potentially wanting to go babyface with Tiffany. I think they could do it with Chelsea because there have been times when she's gotten, more babyface reactions, but the time to do that would have been right after Money in the Bank. And they didn't. And the interactions between her and Tiffany that they've had like this past week on SmackDown to me seem much more position where if they go that route, it would be Tiffany as the face. So I think Charlotte, if she's healthy and ready to go soon, coming back to interrupt the celebration just makes so much sense in terms of what WWE likes to do that it would not surprise me at all.
There's a couple of things in the comments that I want to highlight. Again, if you're watching live on youtube.com/pwtorch, feel free to join in on the comments. Azan says SmackDown is weak with babyface women right now. I mean, you've got Naomi, Jade Cargill, Bianca Belair. I think all three of those could be potential opponents for Nia Jax coming down the line. I wrote about that again. I wrote about looking forward with the title pictures of the four main titles in my upcoming column in the Torch newsletter. Steve joins us. He says, Bad Blood has to have at least one Hell in a Cell match, right? I would say no, especially if you're doing War Games and Survivor Series. I don't think you want to do back-to-back months of cage matches. I think that kind of waters down the War Games concept a little bit. Now, that's not to say WWE won't do that, but I think there are, as Steve mentions, Liv and Rhea, Drew and Seth, or Drew and Punk. Given Seth is going to be away for a while, it seems, and nursing some injuries. They do have some feuds that would fit in Hell in a Cell. I'm just not sure that's the right timing in the schedule with War Games coming up.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess my vote would be, I'd be okay with it because it's not a pay-per-view called Hell in a Cell. And the fact that when you can actually point to a couple of possibilities, pick one, don't do both, but when you have a few possibilities for an organically built to Hell in a Cell match, at a non-Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, it's somewhat refreshing considering everything that they've done in the past, forcing those matches into that theme, pay-per-view, PLE. So I would be okay with it as long as those people are not then also part of War Games. Like if you're going to do the Judgment Day themed, if they're going to be in it instead of the Bloodline, then don't go with Judgment Day people or in the and I
guess you could make the argument that a one-on-one cell match is different enough from a two-ring multi-person cage match that War Games is. I just worry about cage overload at that point. So we'll see. I mean, like you said, if they do one match at Bad Blood and Hell in a Cell, maybe that's okay. You don't want to do more than that, I don't think.
No.
Another question here before we get to John's question. Do you think that they going to bury the new Judgment Day and hope Liv doesn't drop the title too soon? I don't think they're going to bury the new Judgment Day. I think Damien is going to feud with Finn, and these guys will play a big part of that. Carlito, Dominic, etc. I think Liv holds the title until Rhea beats her. And you can pick your own adventure as to when that's going to be, but I feel pretty confident that Rhea is going to take the title off of Liv, whether it's at Bash in Berlin at the end of the month, whether it's at Bad Blood, whether it's at Survivor Series or anything like that.
Yeah, and I don't think losing a title is indicative of being buried necessarily either. So they have the tag title still. They can be a big part. It's important to remember that Judgment Day for a while there was on Raw in about 12 segments a week. And I think they got a little overexposed. And now you've gone in this kind of different direction, a slightly different group where they need to establish themselves without Priest and Ripley. So this next few weeks is very important for them.
Good point, yeah.
But at the same time, without the world champion, and with Liv being the women's world champion, but almost still feeling like a placeholder until Rhea inevitably takes it, maybe in a Hell in a Cell match at Blood. But I think they'll be fine. You also have to consider the shiny new toy of the Wyatt Six on Raw, which is this other faction, which is going to be presented very strongly as a babyface faction for reasons I don't fully understand, but that's another story. So you've got a lot of moving pieces, and I am curious to see how they all ultimately fit together moving forward.
So the next question from John, his next topic is about Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens. I know some fans are not happy that Cody Rhodes handed the title to Kevin Owens, or handed the title shot to Kevin Owens on SmackDown. But I feel it's okay because I personally believe that Owens' reasons for not wanting this match are multifaceted, and there are more interesting developments to come. Plus, I personally like the idea of champions in wrestling having perks that others don't, and one of them could be that they can, at least occasionally, pick their challengers for PLEs or for TV. But I believe Owens was highly resistant to facing Cody, primarily because he is afraid of losing to him, which he hinted at later when referring to the multiple times he came really close to defeating Roman. And this possible insecurity is fascinating to me if he's a babyface. He did say he didn't earn a title match because of his recent win-loss record, but I don't think that's his primary reason for declining this opportunity. I hope this is a babyface versus babyface match, and they tell a compelling story with Owens when he fails to win. Question, what are your thoughts on Cody's handing Owens this title match, and my analysis? I think the analysis is pretty spot on. I do think, we kind of got to dig in a little more to see what Owens' real reasons for deflecting the title match are, other than just being too modest, which is kind of how it came across on SmackDown. So I would be all for the storyline digging a little deeper into Owens' insecurities or whatever is causing him to not want that title match that Nick Aldis ultimately granted on SmackDown for Bash in Berlin. But I think it's an interesting way to go. Randy Orton would have been the obvious choice. He's now on Raw challenging Gunther for that title as a bit of revenge for the King of the Ring finals, which Orton lost, although he had his shoulder up. So, John, what's your analysis of how we got to Kevin Owens versus Cody Rhodes on SmackDown? Do you like even a babyface turning down a championship opportunity, or does that not seem realistic? Should Owens be welcoming any opportunity at a title of that magnitude that he can get?
No, I was okay with Owens' part in it, in part because I'm intrigued to see those developments and what is the real reason. And as a babyface, is he worried about losing because he came so close multiple times, or is there part of him? I'm almost thinking of what they've done with Ospreay and not wanting to use the whatchamacallit, is it the Tiger Driver, the one that he doesn't want to use on Bryan? Is Owens afraid of what he might do to his friend in order to get that title that has eluded him? I could see them going in that direction. which then it's still babyface, but it adds a little bit of something a little more personal, where Cody might say, well, I'm not afraid of you, and Owen says you should be, because I'm not going to let this opportunity, pass me by. I'll do whatever it takes, kind of a thing. So, that has some possibilities. The idea of a champion picking his challengers, I'm not a huge fan of. The fact that at least all this had to actually make the match, it was much better than if Cody just made the match himself, but it's just a little better. I tend to think, title matches are supposed to be special and earned. And this one, I guess depends on how you define earned. But when you have the guy saying, I haven't earned this, it's hard to argue that he has.
Yeah. Is there any chance you think that Kevin Owens turns heel either in the build up to this match? I know we have a very short turnaround. It's just in a couple of weeks now. Or potentially after the match. Do you see that as a possibility at all?
Not before, but after I could see it. And by after, I don't even mean like right after. I mean like in the weeks after, in the aftermath. It's going to be interesting. Again, so much depends to me on War Games, because if you're building a team Cody / Roman to take on the new bloodline, who else is in that team? And Owens would certainly be someone you'd expect to be in that team, but Owens is not going to want to team up with Roman. I really liked that part of his encounter on SmackDown with Aldis, where he's like, you can't give Roman that title shot. Look what he did. And I'm so happy that he's not just going to forgive and forget what Roman put him through, what the bloodline put him through. So could you see Owens turning heel and being on the other team, or just not being part of it, walking away and saying, I'll be on the team, but not if Roman is? Yeah. There's a lot of those possibilities. So I think that a heel turn is definitely possible, but I think it's a longer story they're going to tell. And Triple H tends to tell those kind of long, occasionally bordering on too long of stories for some of these turns and twists.
The final topic that John brings us this week is on Roman Reigns. He says, I was initially a little disappointed when Roman Reigns didn't at least start speaking and sharing an emotional moment with the fans who have been chanting for him every week. But I figure all good things come to those who wait, right? Stories have a certain cadence that they require, and this is chapter 1 of Roman's upon his return, and beating down the new bloodline is chapter 1. It also builds anticipation up for when he does speak, and I think WWE was ultimately smart in not rushing into an extended in-ring promo with him. So John's question, should Roman have spoken on SmackDown, or is it best to build that up? He says, keep up the great work. Thank you as always, John. And don't forget, WNIAlivecast@gmail.com is where you can send your emails. I think it's smart not to have him talk yet. I think there's going to be plenty of time for that. I guess I was a little surprised they kind of did the repeat of what they did at SummerSlam with Roman coming out and beating down the new bloodline on SmackDown. I thought maybe they'd take it a little further than that. I do think it's going to be interesting when Cody and Roman really, they're going to have a promo back and forth at some point. And that's going to be more so than Roman on his own talking to the fans. I'm really intrigued about what Roman and Cody have to say to each other when they do a little bit of a promo battle in the ring. And, as we've talked about, you assume that if it's the Bloodline versus Bloodline at War Games at Survivor Series, Roman is going to have probably Jimmy and Jay. So that's 3. If you figure 5-on-5, he needs 2 more. I know you mentioned in your previous response, potentially Kevin Owens. Cody Rhodes makes a lot of sense. Could you see somebody like Sami Zayn crossing over? Some guys who have had trouble with Roman in the past, who have forgiven Jey Uso, can they offer that same forgiveness to Roman Reigns? Would he even seek it? Is another question. I mean, do you not want to go like full Jey Uso babyface with Roman Reigns, right? The way that WWE completely went babyface and 100% with Jey Uso. Do you want the fans to still cheer Roman Reigns, but not have him go completely 100% babyface? Have him still be aloof a little bit. Have him still feel like, I'm still the tribal chief, but I've been wronged and I need your help to right that wrong, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think to answer the initial question, you advertise Roman's coming back and you pop a rating. You advertise another time Roman's going to speak, or we're going to have a first ever confrontation between, Roman. Like Cody could even say, I got to talk to Roman and I'm going to do it next week. There's smart business practices like that to draw these things out, advertise them, make people want to see it. You got to see the physical side of Roman. Now we're going to see, him or hear him talk. And I think in general, Roman is Roman. Like he should be the same guy he was, because a lot of people were cheering for him anyways, just because of the cool factor, and people like winners. So you've had that going for him, and he's definitely, getting these huge babyface reactions. So you're not going to fight that current. But that doesn't mean he's going to come out here and start doing Cody Rhodes style rah-rah, babyface John Cena kind of stuff. He shouldn't. He should just be himself, and you keep him babyface with his positioning. And there's so many interesting storylines. If Kevin Owens walks away, does his best friend Sami Zayn take his place? It's a lot of interesting things that they can do with that. And of course, what do we have? How many, bloodline members are there? If there's going to be 5-on-5, we don't know Jacob Fatu's health necessarily. Hikuleo is been signed. Will he be part of it? So you could potentially see somebody else crossing over who maybe isn't Samoan or Tongan, not to join the bloodline necessarily the way Sami Zayn did, but to be part of that team. So there's a lot of interesting, I think, intriguing possibilities, but I don't think it was a mistake to not have Roman talk yet. And I think the other issue that we haven't really talked about yet is Paul Heyman, and when does he make his return? And because Paul Heyman walking out and just saying "ladies and gentlemen" is going to get a major babyface reaction that first time. So that'll be interesting to see how he fits into it all too.
John, I'm old enough to remember, and I've done this long enough to remember a decade ago when WWE was pushing Roman Reigns as our babyface savior, and people were rejecting him. They were saying, turn him heel, he would make a great heel, and then after a certain amount of time, you can turn him babyface off of that, and it will be way more effective. We are living that reality right now, John. And it's something that should have happened a decade ago. I mean, imagine where Roman Reigns would be today if WWE was disciplined enough in its storytelling to tell a story like this 10 years ago. It feels like a lot of that was just wasted time with Roman Reigns. And I bring this up because that Roman Reigns is not the babyface we want to see now. Right? We don't want to see Roman Reigns go back to 100% suffering succotash babyface the way he was back then. We want him to be the cool heel babyface, right? That's who we want to cheer for. So I agree. You don't change him completely. You might tweak him here and there in terms of his character, but I think largely you want to stay on the same path. Yeah. A couple things I want to talk about before we move on to previewing All In related to fallout from SummerSlam that we saw this week on WWE TV. Gunther versus Randy Orton. Both major men's title matches have already been set up for Bash in Berlin at the end of the month. Again, we don't have a lot of time in between those two, so it was of the utmost importance that they set them up quickly. Randy Orton versus Gunther. I did not have this on my bingo card. I know Triple H has teased in the past about Orton and Gunther a rematch, given how that match ended at the King of the Ring finals. Surprising that Orton crosses over from SmackDown to Raw. Not much of an explanation. They can come up with one later as to how that happened. But what do you think about Gunther versus Orton as not only a marquee match on this show, but They're going into a territory that is not Gunther's home country, but I know we don't want to say that because that's not true. But it's in that area. It's as close to his home that a PLE has gotten so far. So he's going to get probably a strong reaction. So what do you think about Orton being his opponent for that match?
Yeah, getting past the brand split issues, just looking at it for what it is, I think it's a really smart move because, for one thing, there was the initial shock surprise value. For another, Orton is kind of, in a way, bulletproof right now with his legendary status, and everybody wants to cheer Orton. And I think if you're worried that Gunther is going to get that babyface pop in Germany, and then a wrestler like Orton makes a lot of sense to counter that because everybody loves Orton and they're going to want to see an RKO out of nowhere. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The storyline is there stemming from King of the Ring, as you mentioned. So it all makes a lot of sense. Gunther had such a historic Intercontinental title reign. I think everybody's expecting and hoping that he has a similar world title reign. It's a newer title. It could use, he speaks truth in a lot of ways. Like, he can bring prestige to this still relatively new title, and getting a win over a legend like Orton at the start, his first title defense, because again, Priest wasn't the strongest champion, and he won in part because of shenanigans involving Finn Balor. So I hope it's just a great physical, hard-hitting, intense world title match. Give Gunther the clean win, and you get the title reign off on a better footing that way.
One more thing that I want to mention is what we saw with Seth Rollins. The word is Rollins is going to be out taking care of some nagging injuries for a little bit, which is unfortunate timing because SummerSlam seemed to set up CM Punk versus Seth Rollins more so than continue Punk versus McIntyre, although McIntyre still has the bracelet. Punk is still after that. We saw the promo battle on Raw continuing that. But Seth Rollins not just being taken out, but being taken out by Bronson Reed, and one of the more vicious attacks we've seen on Monday Night Raw in some time. They could have done something where Punk took Seth out or McIntyre took Seth out, something related to the storyline he was embroiled in at the time. They chose Bronson Reed, and I've been banging the Bronson Reed drum for a while now. I've been wanting him to get a push for some time. It certainly seems like they're ready to go forward with a big Bronson Reed push. What did you think about the attack that took out Seth Rollins and the decision to have Bronson Reed be the person who did it?
I liked it for all those reasons. It was brutal. It was memorable. It sets up a big match for when Rollins is ready to come back, whenever that is down the line. And I'm also a fan of Reed. I really enjoyed his work in NXT. I was really surprised when he was let go initially because it just seemed like somebody, Vince McMahon, who was still, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think McMahon was still running things at that point when he was released. So it was surprising because you'd think somebody of his size who can move the way he does would be somebody McMahon would really have wanted. So the fact that he's been come back, I was happy about, but it's been a very lukewarm return. He's had a few matches, a few wins, and then he'll lose to like Ricochet or somebody, and it's like this weird kind of hot and cold return. So if you want to get behind him, you got to do it before you define him down too much too soon. And he was on that verge, I think. So the timing was right to heat him up. Rollins, for all of his oddness and peccadillos and whatever you want to say about him, he is a legacy star. He's a multiple-time world champion. He gets the strong reaction. So people are going to be upset at Reed for what he did, but also I think in awe. And the follow-up as always, is the key. You can't have Reed lose in the next few months. You have to have him get a series of wins and build to something before Rollins comes back. I don't know who that might be, but maybe.
Well, just knowing that they've set Rollins up to come back and beat Bronson Reed, you have to imagine that they're going to keep Reed strong in the interim, or else Rollins coming back and beating Reed means nothing. And Reed versus Rollins is going to be a big match, not only because of the memorable attack that happened on Raw, but also because, as you mentioned, Rollins is a legacy star. He is a main eventer, arguably the biggest star on Monday Night Raw. So that's going to be a big match regardless. So you have to imagine that they're going to keep Reed strong. Derek comments, I like that they put Bronson in a holding pattern over the last year. They did not bury him. They did not push him up. They kept him around and let fans see bits and pieces of him before Monday. I'm sure Bronson is tired of triple threat matches. Somehow he always found himself in triple threat matches. And then BJ says, loved it. Like Greg, I've been a Bronson fan for a while. That got him over in a few minutes rather than a few years previous. So a couple follow-ups there on Bronson Reed. Whenever, John, there is back-to-back PLEs or pay-per-views, the second one always kind of gets the short end of the stick because we never have an opportunity to do a full preview show of that because we're always the week before covering that live pay-per-view. So we're going to do things a little differently this time. All In is in 2 weeks, but we have a pretty sound card right now. They may add few here and there, but we have the major matches in place. So we're going to talk about and preview All In today. And then next week, we're going to preview Bash in Berlin. And then after that, we'll be on the air live after All In. And then on the air live after Bash in Berlin. That's going to be the next month here on Wrestling Night in America. So as we start digging into All In, John, let's start with the Trios title. It is the Patriarchy against the Bang Bang Gang against the House of Black. Patriarchy on Collision this week came out on top. Christian Cage as a special guest referee did his normal shenanigans to throw out the match, basically a double count out. And they then attacked both the Bang Bang Gang and the House of Black, did the Patriarchy. So, Christian, I guess your mileage may vary about whether or not that group still has the kind of legs that it did before. The Bang Bang Gang without Jay White seems like it's missing something to me. House of Black is always they're in that spot where they are treated like a big deal to a point. And so there's kind of just an amalgam of different spaces that these three teams occupy. The Trios title is vacant for now, the AEW version of it. So I'm curious as to what you think of this match and if you have a feeling on which direction they're going to go. I mean, closing out Collision, focusing on this match was an interesting choice, knowing you only have so much TV left until All In. You figure they're going to use that prime real estate of television to build up the most important matches. And here we go, going off the air, building up the Trios title. I'm not complaining. I think that's an interesting choice. I think it makes the match feel bigger when it's featured in the main event segment of a TV show.
Yeah, and it's also Collision, not Dynamite. So they're, there's a clear hierarchy of their shows. I have very small amount of interest in this feud and match, to be honest. I feel like the Bang Bang Gang were like babyfaces, they were heels, and now they're just babyfaces without a turn. Because otherwise it really seems like, in a lot of ways, three heel teams going at each other. I enjoy what Christian does. I've always been a Christian fan, going all the way back to his early Christian and Edge days. But it is a little one note, though, with all the praise for Nick Wayne and then the constant bad mouthing of Killswitch. So at some point, you figure Killswitch has to return to Luchasaurus. The House of Black, I know there have been rumors about maybe some of their contracts being up, and then I think I heard rumors they had re-signed, so I don't really follow it that closely to know where all that stands. Assuming they're all under contract, I kind of feel they should come out of this with the win. The Jay Whitelist group doesn't do anything for me, so I'm not on board with them winning. And the patriarchy doesn't necessarily quote unquote need the titles because of their shtick. And again, I'm just seeing a potential breakup of the group, and maybe might there be somebody out there that Christian brings in as his newest adopted son to replace a leaving Luchasaurus at some point.
I think that's the most interesting part of this is Kill Switch. When does he turn? How does he turn? Does he get the kind of babyface response that AEW has sort of been building with this? I still think we're a ways off of that, actually. Like, I know that it feels like they've been teasing this for a while. Christian's been needling Kill Switch for a while, but it still does feel like we're not near the end of this quite yet.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
We have Darby Allin versus Jack Perry for the TNT Championship. Not to be confused with Jack Perry versus Taco Bell, which seemed to be the feud that was built up on Dynamite when a Taco Bell commercial interrupted Jack Perry's promo. And then I think they re-aired the same one on Collision this past week. But this is kind of intriguing to me because I think there are a lot of comparisons to be made between Darby Allin and Jack Perry, both in their size and stature for sure, for one, but also I think Jack Perry has, as a heel, sort of adopted some of the carelessness related to his body that Darby Allin has. Jack Perry was willing to light himself on fire. It had to be one of the Young Bucks who submitted in that match a few weeks ago, the Blood and Guts match. So I do like this darker Jack Perry, this brooding back Jack Perry. I think that's a really good character turn for him. Gave him that harder edge. And I think this is going to be a violent match. I think both of these guys are going to lay it on the line because that's kind of who they are now. So this is kind of one that's a little bit underrated. It hasn't been built in the same fashion that a lot of the other matches have been in terms of just hammering it. It's relatively new compared to some of the other matches on this card. But I do think it has the potential to be the dark horse, one of the more interesting matches on the card at All In.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the build suffers from the too many titles syndrome. It's hard to keep them all straight. So it's like, oh, wait, is Christian a champion? I honestly don't know. Like, I'm picturing him like, wait, is Christian a champion right now or not? And it gets a little confusing with so many titles. And he's like, oh, this is for the TNT title. Okay, well, let me remember that. So I think that's part of it. It's just hard to concentrate on it as a title match. Maybe it would be better off if it wasn't a title match, if it was strictly a feud type match where you build to it through what they've done with the Elite versus the AEW originals or whatever they're calling them. That might make the build a little bit better. I do agree with you in general that Perry has been much more interesting since his return than he was as either a babyface or a heel before his return. So he's got that going for him. The Jungle Boy gimmick was only going to take you so far, and it's definitely beneficial that he has long since dropped that and moved on to something more adult in a way.
Lady B checking in. Darby with 2 title shots at once is a choice. I'm excited for the match. Just manifesting that Perry comes out to Justin Timberlake's Cry Me a River. So that would certainly test Tony Khan's ability to purchase theme songs. I actually think that might be a better choice for Drew McIntyre in his next match with CM Punk. If Drew truly wants to be the troll of all trolls, as his online and social media personality has taken, that might be something Drew McIntyre wants to do before a match against CM Punk. we've got the Casino Gauntlet match. Nobody, I don't think, has been announced for this. It is for a future AEW title shot, as Lady B mentioned. Darby Allin already has one. Anything and any comments about this? We don't. There's not really much to talk about since we don't really know who's in it. But I assume that there's going to be some, a lot of the top talent who doesn't have a match on the card will be in this. Do you have a sense of anyone who you could identify potentially as getting an AEW title match via this Casino Gauntlet match?
I mean, nobody comes to mind, but their roster is so big, Greg. There's already so many people on the show. It's like I'd really have to take some time to think about and kind of look at the roster, and then you never know. They like to do the Joker, right? Who's going to be the Joker? I don't know the health status of some of these guys. Ricochet, yeah.
I think that's if they have the Joker position, that has become known as a way to introduce new characters into AEW. I think Ricochet would be a betting favorite for that.
That makes a lot of sense. Again, I don't know the health status of guys off the top of my head, like an Adam Cole or a Jay White or any of those people. Are they close to coming back? I have no idea. So yeah, it's hard to know. They've had these, what do they call them, Greg? The ones where two people start and the match can end any time. So you might be waiting to come out, but somebody gets a pin before you even come out.
They just had one on TV.
Yeah, and they had one like maybe a month before that when they were back in Daly's place. I think they did one. So these kind of gauntlets, battle royals, the other style match to death to me. So it's hard to get excited about it. I know this concept with the cards going back to the first pay-per-view, the first Double or Nothing. It's kind of a AEW original, so having it be at their quote-unquote biggest match of the year makes a lot of sense. But it's hard to get excited about until you start to see some actual names being introduced and you start to think, okay, yeah, I could see, that wrestler or this wrestler winning it.
Lashley, another name thrown out by BJ there, his contract coming to an end with WWE. I've got their roster page up, just looking through the alphabetical list. Brian Cage always seems to be getting a push. I don't know if that's somebody who would win a match like this. Chris Jericho does not have a match for All In yet, although I'm sure he'll find one. Claudio Castagnoli. We haven't seen Jon Moxley lately. No real explanation for where he is. I mean, that could be a way to get him back in the top level mix. Like you mentioned, we don't know the health status of some of these guys. Jay White has been out. We don't know if he'll be ready to come back by that point. Kazuchika Okada doesn't have a match yet either, although he could end up with a singles match on the show or a match of some kind on the show. Kota Ibushi is another one if they really wanted to reintroduce him, and he's healthy enough. He could be a guy who comes back. Miro, we don't know what's up with him, but he's out there. Throw him out there. Ricky Starks maybe. I don't know. So it's you're shaking your head no on Ricky Starks?
I think he's got a foot out the door, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean that's the reporting for a long time has been there's interest in WWE and him, perhaps even mutual interest. That's a possibility too. Derek says he thinks Okada versus Claudio is official. I got the list off of Wikipedia, so if Wikipedia is wrong, I guess they're wrong. But Okada and Claudio certainly has been hinted at, and I think they're probably just waiting on Tony Khan to make it official on TV. But I'm sure it is official.
It'll probably get that official announcement on Dynamite. The other thing with these matches is they tend to give to somebody maybe a little under the radar who wouldn't build up to a title match, the way like a Brian Danielson had a acid flashback. But, they have, so it's a chance because...
Kind of why I threw Brian Cage out there, because I imagine, he's not a guy who's going to work his way up the ladder and become a main eventer in AEW, but he's been pushed just enough to where you think, well, he could win a match like this and get a one-off title match at some point.
Yeah, and WWE can do similar things with the Royal Rumble with some of their surprise entrants, but that's WrestleMania. So you're not going to get one of those kind of guys winning it.
Right.
Whereas, this is for a future title match on an unspecified time and an unspecified show. It doesn't even have to be on a pay-per-view. So you do have a little more freedom there to go with a wrestler like that.
It opens up the possibilities.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is just to keep in mind with a Ricochet or a Lashley, that type of debuting person, they almost have to win because you don't want them to debut and not win, but then they're going to go on to face the champion and probably not win the championship. So there is a little bit of a balancing act you have to consider when introducing a new act to your company in a match like this.
Another match, we're getting into the top matches here now. MJF versus Will Ospreay for the AEW American title, I guess it is now. So officially, unofficially, the American title. We spent a lot of time in the previous months, John, talking about Will Ospreay and Swerve Strickland and assuming that was the match that was going to happen here at All In. Will Ospreay seemed like he was shooting up the ladder, culminating in a title win over Swerve at All In. Instead, they gave him the title match prior. He didn't win. And now he's in a major match on this show, but not going to main event. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on Will Ospreay. I know I've talked with Wade Keller at length about it on a 12-minute hot take, as well as a few recent editions of the flagship. And we're really both on board as Will Ospreay is the top star of AEW, or should be the top star of AEW. And if AEW felt that way, it kind of feels like he would be in that match with Swerve Strickland. But what do you think about Will Ospreay not having that opportunity here and instead going against MJF for the American title?
Well, I think that Brian Danielson's status probably changed things, and I can understand them wanting to give him this match as a big, whether it's his final match, probably not, but a maybe final big match of his career. So I think that makes some sense. And I don't believe, despite the goofiness of the international/American title or the idea that there's too many titles, in general, a match with MJF isn't much of a consolation. I start to say it's not much of a consolation. I don't want that to be taken wrong. It's not a big step down because it's MJF, who's been one of their top stars. He's been their champion. And you had the match, that went 59 minutes and 57 seconds or whatever to lose. They've been building this idea that he doesn't want to use the most dangerous, move, which I'm not a big fan of that whole storyline, but they've built to it to the point where if he does it on MJF in Wembley Stadium, that's going to get a huge reaction. So I don't think it's a problem that they're doing it this way, but at the same time, you don't want to wait too long because I agree with you. You want to build your company, especially the babyface side of it, around Will Ospreay. It just makes the most sense. I've always been a big fan of Swerve, going back before I knew his name was Swerve, when he had a mask as Killshot in Lucha Underground. I was always impressed with him and his work in NXT, and I couldn't believe, WWE dropped the ball. So I've been happy to see him get a push, but I don't know that it's been as strong as it should have been. And maybe, getting to that Ospreay point, whether it's a title versus title down the line, would work potentially. But yeah, I'm expecting big things from this match, and I don't think it hurts that much that it's not going to be, main event world title.
What have you thought of MJF's heel act since he's returned?
Underwhelmed. It's, I mentioned Randy Orton and Gunther, and not wanting, or worried about maybe Gunther getting the babyface reaction. Why are you worried about MJF getting a babyface reaction against Will Ospreay in England, where it's almost like we've got to really hammer home this thing where he's the American so that the fans in England will hate him even more? It's weird. It's unnecessary. And it's like fighting uphill, because then you're going to get some USA chants for him and all these shows that are in America leading up to it. Then he has to go out there and say, like, I love America, just not this particular city. And it's cheap heat. And yeah, so I have not been a big fan, if I'm being honest, with at least since this kind of heel turn, especially since the title win.
Steve in the chat says, I can see Danielson's last match before his surgery being Wrestle Dream, which is in Washington State. He did mention to Jim Ross in the sit down on Collision that he was going to have his neck, probably a neck surgery, I believe is what he said. I think in terms of MJF, has it been perfect? No. But I will take this MJF over babyface MJF any day.
Yes.
There probably is room for some nuance in there. Heel MJF doesn't necessarily have to be this heel MJF, with the cheap heat and everything like that, and you know, some of the depths that he explores on the mic as a heel that I think is kind of unnecessary. But if babyface MJF is going to be the kind of babyface we saw as Adam Cole, I would much take heel MJF over that any day.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's move on to probably one of the most anticipated matches on this card, and that is Toni Storm versus Mariah May for the women's title. These two had a heart-wrenching breakup. Mariah May, a very memorable attack on Toni Storm. Since then, I think there's been some criticisms of how Mariah May has been presented. I liked her coming out dressed as Toni Storm the first time she came out. After, I mean, that was really the payoff. I mean, that was the capper. That was what this whole thing was all about. And the promo, there were some criticisms about that as well. I think Toni has shown the right level of anger and craziness, I guess, that she's devolved into since Mariah May turned on her. And I think Mariah May has played her part very well. And I think they've done a really nice job of making this tremendously anticipated, I guess. Maybe that's not the correct wording, but people are looking forward to this. And it's going to be a brawl. It's going to be a wild fight, I imagine. And I think Mariah May should win the title here. What do you think about how things have been built since the Mariah May turn, and if you have any predictions for the match?
Yeah, I think the problem is that Toni Storm is a fantasy character who's now suddenly living in a reality world, if that makes sense. And it's hard, as much as I usually enjoy her gimmick and throwing the shoe and her black and white and all of that stuff. It's clever. It's usually well done. It's entertaining. It's still goofy comedy, mid-card act with a world champion involved. And I think that's been problematic. And it's part of the problem here is now we need to take Toni Storm seriously after all that blood she lost. It's like you said, it's going to be an intense fight. It's going to be a brawl. I have no doubts that it'll be very good. But it's hard to shift, in my mind, from that fantasy character, cartoonish character, to now we want to see her really get revenge. And I can definitely see Mariah May getting the win here. It almost seems like you don't go to those lengths if you're not going to go ahead and put the title on her.
Right.
Yeah.
There's two ways that they could have gone with Toni Storm after the breakup. They could have continued this fantasy character as we're seeing now, where she's just a lot more intense. She's got the same promo cadence. She's speaking in the same antiquated style. She's dressing slightly differently, but still from the era. But she's just got a little harder edge to her because of the breakup. The other thing that could have happened is the blood loss, the attack somehow could have woken Toni Storm up and transplanted her back into the current day with a more realistic character, with not this fantasy character, and taken on Mariah May that way. So AEW going with the former instead of the latter on that. This character is very popular, so I can see them wanting to milk it for as long as they can.
Sure, I get that. It's just, it's that old argument that Wade Keller used to say, if Stone Cold Steve Austin could juggle and was the best juggler in the world, that doesn't mean you'd have Stone Cold, juggling. It's just, it's not your top act. And for me, I really enjoy the character, and it's a guilty pleasure in a way, but it's not a character I wanted to see as a world champion character. That's the issue for me. And I do think, they've done a fine job. I haven't had a problem with what they've done, after the breakup. And, the breakup, again, similar to the Reed situation, it was very memorable. It was very bloody. It was, you're not going to forget it. Yep. So I don't have a problem with anything they've done since then. It's more just trying to launch myself into it from where they had been before that. That's more the issue to me.
So Steve in the chat making the comment that Toni and Mariah is in a much better place than Mercedes and Britt. That takes us to Mercedes Moné versus Dr. Britt Baker DMD TBS title match. I do think the anticipation for this match, John, is not at the level today that it was when Britt Baker first came back. And you can blame the suspension that Baker was put on. You can blame whatever the case may be. Promos, I know there's some criticisms of Mercedes Moné's promos still. But I still do think that seeing this match is going to be interesting, even though the buildup maybe has not lived up to that first night where Britt Baker comes out at the previous pay-per-view. She makes her return after the Mercedes Moné match against Stephanie Vacker. But I do think, for me anyway, personally, I think it's a really interesting matchup. Two very dynamic personalities in the women's division in AEW. You have Camille, who's been added to this situation as Mercedes Moné's backup. You kind of get the sense that she's going to play a part in the finish. What have you thought of the build? I mean, are you sitting here today with the same level of anticipation for this match as when Dr. Britt Baker made her return and this match was all but set up?
Yeah, I think I am in large part more from a behind the scenes standpoint of Britt Baker being so firmly established as kind of the face, not recently because she was gone for so long, but she had been the face of the women's division in AEW almost from the start. And obviously, Sasha Banks was such a huge part of WWE's women's division for so long. And yes, Toni Storm was in WWE, but she was not anywhere close to the level, as Sasha was. So it's almost a little bit of that AEW versus WWE dream match. If you had talked a couple years ago before she was released, you might have pegged this as a match that could be a big deal if in those fantasy, if they did a fantasy, WWE AEW co-promoted show. Well, now we get it. Then getting into the more specifics, I think maybe part of the problem is has been on Camille as her backup bodyguard, second heavy, whatever you want to list it, and not as much focus on the actual match itself. So that has been a problem. It I don't think will ultimately matter in the end, but what are you going to do if you take her off TV for a couple weeks because of this suspension? It's hard. Yeah. The timing isn't great, but it is what it is. If you feel it was a suspension-worthy infraction on her point, you kind of have to do it because otherwise suspensions don't
Especially
mean
Tony Khan, who's been criticized in the past for not laying down the law in a way that he should.
Sure.
I know there was probably, they've got a discipline committee that looks at things. That was, I think, who handed down the 2-week suspension. But, for Tony Khan to put those mechanisms in place to deal with things like that, he's got to follow through on his end as well.
Yeah. And you still have a couple weeks, right? So you have a chance once that suspension is over. She'll be back, and I think they'll be fine.
I know we talked about this match at times during the show already. Swerve Strickland, Bryan Danielson, title versus career. I did feel like Bryan Danielson putting his career on the line, as it tends to do, sort of tipped the scales a little bit and made me feel more confident that Bryan Danielson was going to win. I kind of thought it was a toss-up before that, but with Danielson putting his career on the line, that certainly tips the scales, in my opinion, more toward Danielson. I mean, especially knowing that his whole story was like that this was going to be his last full year, and now he's saying, well, if I lose this match, I'm going to cut out the end of my career and just stop right here. And I don't know, that just doesn't pass the smell test for me. So I think he wins. And I don't know what that means for Swerve Strickland. I think that Swerve has benefited from being the champion. I think he has looked very good doing it. I think he has met the moment with both his in-ring work, which there was never really a question about, also his promos. He had a certain style that I think people kind of wondered, would that translate to the main events? And he has absolutely lived up to that, I think. You just hope that once his title reign is over, whether it's at All In or whether it's sometime afterward, he doesn't kind of tumble back down the card, because he's not that established main event guy like a Jon Moxley. A Jon Moxley loses the title, he's still going to be a main event. Kenny Omega loses the title, he's still going to be a main eventer. Swerve is kind of new to the main events as a character on this scale. So I think his performance to this point has proven that he deserves to stay at that level even after he loses the title.
Yeah, but of course there's also, only so many main event spots to go around, and you just mentioned some people who you would think would still be higher on the card when they're back or whatnot. But I agree in general with the statement about the stipulation and the retirement. I've not been a fan of it. It does seem to over announce the win for Bryan, but I've been wrong before. I will say the first ever Torch podcast I was ever on, Greg, was a daily cast back when there were daily casts and a rotation.
It was Thursdays.
Well, but before there was like the normal pattern, because they had that normal pattern. It was just kind of like different people. I was on with Wade, and this will date it. I boldly predicted that there was no way Shawn Michaels was going to lose to The Undertaker because he was never going to be retiring yet. So that tells you how long ago that was. But I was so sure that Shawn Michaels was not retiring. So I said, of course, finally the streak will come to an end. But so, I've been wrong before, but the idea that Danielson will lose and cold turkey, I find it hard to buy into, like you. So it's
and the thing was, even when Danielson was talking about retiring, he was talking about retiring from full-time competition.
Right.
So that kind of gave you the impression that he might wrestle once or twice a year for AEW moving forward. Now, if he loses here, does that mean that's out of the question too?
And of course, Mick Foley has had how many matches since he retired? So yeah, it doesn't.
And Ric Flair.
And everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
How many times did Terry Funk have a retirement match in his career, going back to probably the 80s? So yeah, that stipulation doesn't necessarily hold a lot of water. You would hope that if you're gonna do it, you would make it stick. And maybe facing this neck surgery, he realizes, hey, I was originally going to cut back and only do a handful of dates a year for special occasions. And maybe he's had a change of heart and says, you know what, I really need to get out and really be done with it, which doesn't mean he won't change his mind in 2 years, but it's hard to know what's going through his mind. We're not in his head. We're not there with his family in those conversations. So yeah, it could certainly go the other way, but you're not playing in front of as big a crowd as last year, but you're still playing in front of what's going to be, 50, 60,000 people, right? I mean, it's a huge crowd. It's a huge show. And not that Swerve's, a bad person to end that show, but a yes, title celebration in front of that crowd just seems the way you want to end that show, more than a downer of now he loses and he's got to go away and never wrestle again. So, and to kind of go back to what we mentioned before with Ospreay, if fans were buying tickets a few months ago expecting Ospreay to be crowned the world champion in that match, having Bryan win it is not a bad consolation prize.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To send those fans home. And if they want to make this, I don't know, a yearly thing, are they going to do Wembley again next year? I don't know. But you got to keep that momentum, because they can't necessarily sell out. You're already seeing what's going to be a great crowd, but not nearly as big as last year. So you don't want to do anything to necessarily sour those fans either.
316 MMA says the all-in card does not look good on paper. SummerSlam was better. I'd rather have 7 matches than 15 matches. Well, we're only at 2, 4, 6, 7, or 8 right now. So reasonable level. Of course, we've got 2 weeks to add more matches, and there's a lot of matches that have been teased with Chris Jericho and folks like that. So it is going to get bigger. This is not the final card by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, Jericho Hook seems like an inevitable match. I was not a big fan of SummerSlam this year. In general,
I thought it was thumbs in the middle, to be honest.
Yeah, I would never have been able to go thumbs up, and I had to think about it, and I would have, I think like a solid 5, 5.5. To me, 5 is like right there, So yeah, I think, but again, I think, is there a grading on a curve? SummerSlam should always be a big thumbs up. And so even if you take away the name SummerSlam and just look at the show, it's this. But then you think about it being SummerSlam, maybe it starts to go a little bit in that direction, because I have higher expectations. And the entire card was built around, Seth Rollins, what's he going to do? Dominic, what's he going to do? Finn Balor, what's he going to do? Tiffany Stratton, what's she going to do? I'm probably missing a few, but it was a weak card going into it, because it was so much more about those angles than about the matches themselves. And I agree, you don't need 14 matches, and I'm counting the pre-show. If you're going to put 4 matches on the pre-show and like 11 on the regular, or 9 on the regular, that's still the show. And WWE is thankfully they have these ridiculously long pre-shows, but they don't have matches on them, so I don't have to watch. And so, but I don't want to necessarily miss a match. So, so that could
be Hangman versus Jeff Jarrett also thrown out there as a possibility for this card.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So that is, and I know, I have people who disagree with my take, which is, I don't mind 5 matches on a WWE PLE because I'm only paying $5 for Peacock or $10 for Peacock, or if you're me, $0 for Peacock. Thank you, Comcast. But I'm paying $50 or whatever it is for a pay-per-view. Then I want 10, 12 matches. I get that. I can understand that argument, but I still feel that more is just not better. And there is the law of diminishing returns, where you wear out the live crowd, You wear out the home audience who starts to get restless. And so, yeah, would I rather have All In be, 7 or 8 matches? 100%. And I do worry about it getting overbooked.
Well, that'll do it for tonight. Next week, right here, we will do a full preview of what we have so far for the WWE Bash in Berlin show. And then, of course, the week after that will be our All In post show. We'll be going live on the air following the All In pay per view. And the week after that, we'll be doing the same thing for Bash in Berlin. John, as always, it's a pleasure. Before we let you go ahead and fill people in on what you do for the Torch and where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, so I do the Raw hits and misses on pwtorch. I've been a little, for some people might know, a lot of people listening to the show don't follow me on Twitter. My wife is going through chemotherapy right now, so my contributions to the Torch have been more intermittent. I did not have a chance to do one this past week, but in general, doing the Raw hits and misses, which is very basic. Hey, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't like. It's a hit, it's a miss. And we have a great group of hits and misses contributors on the Torch, so check out all of the work. I'm not going to name them all because I'll forget somebody, but I think all the major Raw, WWE, AEW shows, pay-per-views, trying to think maybe somebody's doing one for Impact also. So it's a fun article. Mine usually come out Wednesdays on pwtorch.com. I also occasionally show up here. I occasionally show up on Frank Pettiani's, as we mentioned earlier, Then and Now pay-per-view, as I did in June for that King of the Ring 94 look back, which was a lot of fun. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, go VIP. You can follow me at John Mezzera at Twitter. That is JONMEZZERA. Thank you for having me, Greg. It's always been a blast. Thank you.
All right, John.
That was a horrible ending.
Yeah. Well, again, your first time. We're going to give you. We're going to cut you some slack. So
it's always been a blast.
Well, thank you, John, and we'll. I think I speak for everybody listening when we'll keep your wife and your family in our thoughts and prayers, and thinking about them and hoping for the best.
Thank you, Greg.
Of course. All right. So don't forget, you can follow me on social media at Greg M. Parks. You can email the show anytime, WNIALivecast@gmail.com. We'll talk to you right here next week, because if it's Sunday, it is Wrestling Night in America.